this day in some ways of remembrance that we should never forget. And thankful for those people of any here that serve in our armed forces or other first responders that in this day just really help us remember the incredible value and the sacrifice that you provide and you do for our people and for our nation. So once again, thank you very much for your service. But turning to our event today for here this afternoon, really we want to, some of you may be first-time participants, so we'll give you a little bit of background and then we'll really dive into the subject matter. But let me start first. My name is Enrique Visoso. John Fries, who is a director for the Center for Professional Education, unfortunately had a conflict and asked me to step in and do the introductions for our event today. But I work with John in the development of the Supply Chain Continuing Education Program. This is part of some of the events that we carry as part of continuing education in the supply chain space. We've started these a couple of years ago in an opportunity to not only share best practices and information, but also allow people to network, to connect with each other. A little harder on the webinar events, but we know and we hope that soon we'll be able to get back together in person and maybe be able to share some lunches as well. I also want to mention that the Chattanooga Regional Manufacturers Association, we're partners on these events, and we thank very much Megan King, who is the president and CEO of CRMA, and really for any participants today that have reached us through the CRMA organization. You know, thank you very much for your participation. We're always looking for topics and information to share with you. So if you have some suggestions of topics that you would like to see us cover, please don't hesitate to let Megan know, contact John directly, or if you know me and have my contact information, don't hesitate to contact me as well. Before I introduce Brian, our speaker today, let me mention a couple of events that we've got from a UTC perspective. Most of you know by now that we are providing courses for APICS, certification preparation courses. The next course we have coming up is for production and inventory management. That will be starting in January 16th. The information is in our website, and you can gather more information there and request any additional information if that need be. So please visit our website and look for that information. And the other is coming out of the virus and all that has been going on, we've had a lot of questions around risk management. In partnership with the Center for Industrial Services, University of Tennessee Center for Industrial Services, we're putting together on October 8th a 3-hour workshop from 1 to 4 p.m. On risk planning. What is the process? What tools can I use to plan and work around the risks that you may have for your business? So if you're interested in that, once again, yeah, you can go to our website to get some additional information. Before I introduce Brian, one last comment. So Brian is going to be talking about an employee survey that they've done. Because there's so much information where we're going to ask you for questions. Write the questions as we go, because with all the information he's sharing, it's going to be better for us to tackle your question at the moment in which he is discussing the information instead of waiting till the end to pull up all the questions and try to go back and forth in the different slides and different information that he shared. So we'll be watching the chat box. You can type in your question and we'll be addressing the questions as we go. Okay? So please don't hesitate. Don't be shy. Ask questions. So Brian Devine is Senior VP for EmployBridge. He is a veteran of 25 years working in the staffing industry. And in 1999, Brian started the really ProLogistix company, which is the largest provider of staffing when you're looking at the logistics segment. He also leads the resource manufacturing portion of the staffing industry. Combined between those two, so you get a sense of magnitude, they have about 40,000 associates across the country. So they have their fingers, they reach out and connect with thousands of people across the country. He's recognized as a leader in labor topics in various industry segments, and he speaks at a number of regional and national conferences. He's also frequently reach out to information and be quoted in other communications, like in the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, DC Velocity Magazine. So we're fortunate to have Brian share with us today this incredible survey that they've been doing for a number of years, and that gives us into some insights into what is happening when we're focused on the hourly workforce and what's motivating people. How can we recruit and retain people? I will mention that while the focus may be logistics, really the mindset, the priorities, the thoughts are some that really can apply across industries. And so, Brian, enough of me. They come here to listen to you. So please look forward to listening to the insights from your survey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Enrique. And it's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to address this group. So we'll hop right into it, if that's okay. And we'll start, let's see, by advancing, I think, my slides. Here we go. Okay, so just the things that we're going to cover over the next 40 minutes or so. I'm going to give you some basic information that is published by the Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we work closely with the job board Indeed. And so I promise not to bore you to tears with that basic information, but it helps lay the groundwork for some future discussions a little later in this presentation. Enrique mentioned that we do a survey, an annual survey, and we've been doing it since 2008, and we call it the Voice of the Blue Collar Worker survey. And it's all, there's over 30,000 participants in 2020 of this survey, and it's worked out great. Just this year alone, just 30,000 participants. Will go into some of their preferences as it relates to their job. Secondly, during this pandemic, we also conducted smaller surveys related specifically to the pandemic. And so we'll be able to share with you guys some information, like what's in the mindset of these workers as they prepare to go to work. And then we'll cover some of the unemployment benefits that are out there. And we end up by the last page is some recommendations that we have for companies to figure out ways to attract and retain the best workers. So with that, and just as a reminder, Enrique mentioned it, please use the chat box. I'd love to answer questions as we go along. So if something I'm saying prompts a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat box, and Jeff and Enrique will be watching that, and they'll chime in. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the information that the Department of Labor publishes every Thursday morning. They identify the number of brand new initial jobless claims, unemployment benefits. And so the last week in March, there were 6.9 million new claims, 6.9 million new claims for unemployment. Now I want to put that in perspective. Many of you were in business during the Great Recession in 2009, 2008 and 9. The biggest week that we ever had during the Great Recession was 665,000 claims. So in that 1 week at the end of March, and it's represented there on the graph, there were 10 times that number in just that 1 week. And even now we're seeing, it's dropped just below 1 million brand new claims, but that's pretty interesting how many people, it's been well over 50 million people filed for unemployment benefits during this pandemic. It's just a huge percentage of the working population. So the Department of Labor, typical, in government fashion, The Department of Labor tracks the number of new unemployment claims, but it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics that publishes the official unemployment rate. And what's interesting is that I actually don't agree with the way the BLS publishes their rate right now. I don't often take exception to it or have some comments about it, but I want to give you some basic facts. And Enrique, I'm going to close you out there. Okay, so back in February, the unemployment rate was 3.5%, and there were about 5.8 million people who were unemployed around the country. Now, when the stimulus package was passed, the CARES Act was passed, there was a part of that stimulus package that allowed independent contractors, many of you know them as gig workers, to file for unemployment benefits. Those independent contractors, prior to the stimulus package, were not eligible for unemployment payments and unemployment benefits because they weren't working for an employer who was contributing to the unemployment benefits pool on their behalf. And so the gig workers and independent contractors and that kind of stuff, those people previously were not eligible for unemployment benefits. You can see that little call out down there at the bottom. The total number of people receiving some type of unemployment benefits from the government in the middle of August was 29 million people. About 13 or 14 million of them were these independent contractors, or they were filing benefits under the PUA, which stands for the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. So if there's 29.2 million people receiving unemployment benefits through the government, there must be 29.2 million people who are unemployed. We know that the labor force is about 160 million people, and that would represent 18.2% unemployment, not the official rate of 8.4% unemployment. So the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks it, they're not counting those people that are participating in the PUA benefits. And for me, I would argue that those people receiving unemployment benefits should be considered unemployed. I'll stop there to see if you guys have any questions about that. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about unemployment benefits in the coming slides. Okay, this graphic that you see now, we work closely with the company Indeed, the job board Indeed, and you can see that in the warehouse business, there was a lot of growth. This is indexed back to the beginning of February, and that was pre-pandemic. You can see there was an enormous growth in the beginning of March, and then it kind of fell off a cliff, and then it's gained back up again. That sharp decline that you see in March happened because that's the period where people were trying to figure out, are we an essential employer or not? Do we qualify as an essential employer? And so until it took a couple of weeks for them to figure out whether they did qualify or did not qualify as an essential employer. And then you see that the new job postings for jobs continued week after week after week. And you can see that I'm going to ask you to pay particular attention to the y-axis there. That's the percentage. So we're about 250% in new job postings compared to last year. It's just unbelievable. Compared to the February postings. Yeah. So there's a lot of activity out there. The next graph that you see here in front of you, I have been tracking our pay rates for ProLogistix and Resource MFG since 2002. And I compare those pay rates to the Consumer Price Index. So the Consumer Price Index is that blue line that you see, and our average pay rate is that red line. And so working backwards from the right, from 2020 to 2002, it would cost you $258 today to buy the same stuff that you could have bought for $181 back in 2002. So the CPI, basically think of it as the cost of living, that's gone up year after year after year at a pretty steady pace. On the other hand, now I want to call your attention to that red line, and that's our average pay rate. And let's see, bear with me for a second. So the average pay rates were stagnant for 12 years. Between 2002 and 2014, you see that gap between the cost of living, if you will, a CPI, and the pay rates really kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And now in the last 3 years, there's been dramatic increase in the average pay rates that we see in the supply chain. These are manufacturing people, and these are warehouse workers. These are all hourly workers. And so when you see that sharp increase between 2016 and 2020, I actually refer to that as a correction. You know, those pay rates they would have already been at almost $15 an hour had we kept pace with the cost of living for these workers. And so I'm actually glad to see that there's been a correction in wages, that we're seeing actually our average wages just reaching $15 an hour now. Okay. Now we'll get into the results of this survey. Once again, we call it the Voice of the Blue Collar Worker survey, and it's all hourly workers from the supply chain. And so to put it in perspective, the first time we did the survey was in 2008. And you may remember in 2007, it was very difficult. The unemployment rates were very low. And we got a whopping 834 responses that year. And I just shared with you at the beginning of this presentation that this year we got over 30,000 responses. So we feel confident that we're capturing the mindset of the supply chain worker in the survey results. So the very first question we'll ask everyone on this survey is, what is the single most important thing to you when you are looking for a job? And you can see that the pay rate, the starting pay rate, is the single most important thing to hourly workers. And that's followed by job security. And I'll share with you that these results have been the same. Those two results, pay rate and job security, have ranked number 1 and number 2 for every year for the last 13 years. Now, there are a lot of employee surveys that are conducted. As a matter of fact, the Society of Human Resource Management Association does a great one every other year. And most employee surveys show pay or compensation as either number 3 or number 4 in importance. I've never seen it rank pay as number 1, with the exception of our survey. And I'd like to describe why I think that there's a difference. Most employee surveys capture the mindset of people that are making $40,000 and $60,000 and $80,000 and $100,000 a year. And when you're making $80,000, you don't leave that job for $85,000. But when you're making $12 an hour, you would probably leave that job for an opportunity to make $14. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they refer to this group as the low wage earners. And we have more details on it, but many of you are familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's all about food and shelter first. And that's what we're talking about here, is that these guys, these men and women, they need to make a good competitive pay rate so they can pay their bills, so they can rent an apartment and buy a car. And job security, I'll point out, is number 2. Job security does not only mean, do I have a job or don't I have a job? Job security can also mean, let's see, did my 40-hour-a-week job just become 28 hours a week because I got sent home early a couple times, or they canceled the shift? And so these workers, they need a combination of good, steady schedule and good, fair pay rates.
Hey, Brian, let me ask you a question.
Yep.
So have you seen, since you look at this survey over years, as you've seen the wages increase, is the relative strength of that pay number one in comparison to the others? Has it been as strong? Is it getting stronger, or has the strength or the growth in pay rates maybe reduced the difference between the two?
Boy, that is such a good question. It is each year, it has been running about the same. It changes a little bit as people, when you move up the pay rate scale. So the people that are making $15 an hour rank it, a fewer percentage of them rank it as number one compared to the people that are making $11 an hour.
Okay.
And so the more stable their income, the higher their income is, the less likely it is that there'll be a big gap between the first and the second thing in terms of what's important. Yeah. And a few of the other things, enjoy the work and benefits and training opportunities, those things will change based on the economic cycle that we're in. In difficult economic times, benefits show up as really important. And so you can see that enjoy the work is down at number 4. Many of these workers don't even expect to really enjoy the work. Those of us on this call, that may rank as a matter of fact, when I do surveys, when we do these things in person, I often will poll the audience, and enjoy the work is often the single most important thing for most people. But the big takeaway here, guys, is that the hourly workers think differently about their jobs than you might about your job. And so that's really important for you to understand as you find yourselves in management positions and or creating the HR policies that are tied to these workers. Moving on, I'd shared with you that there's over 30,000 participants, and these hourly workers, once again, they're all in the supply chain. They fell into one of 3 categories. They were our clients' full-time hourly workers. They were our associates working on assignments at our clients' facilities. And finally, they were qualified applicants. And by qualified applicants, we mean people that have worked in the manufacturing and logistics industry for at least 6 months. So if somebody was an applicant and they only had retail experience or hospitality experience, we did not include them in the survey. We wanted this to be limited specifically to supply chain hourly workers. We asked these workers, what shift do you prefer? Okay, here's no surprise. Most people prefer first shift. And then second shift was preferred 16% of the time and 13% of the time for third shift. And I'll point something out. For the first 10 years of the survey, we actually asked workers, which shift are you willing to work? And during those 10 years, 62% of the population on average was willing to work second or third shift. And 64% of the population was willing to work weekends. However, that wasn't their preference. And the reason we changed the wording of this question is because the last thing we want and our clients want is somebody to take a third shift job and then leave it 2 days later or 2 weeks later because they found a first shift job that they really wanted. And there was such a huge demand for labor over the last 5 years that workers had a preference. They had options. And so if they wanted to work first shift, they could always find a job on first shift. Or if they wanted to work third shift, they could always find a job on third shift. So that's why the reason behind us changing the wording of that question. We asked, which shift structure do you prefer? And of course, the most common shift structure is your 5 days a week at 8 hours per day, followed by 4 10-hour shifts. And only 14% of the population prefers a 12-hour shift. That's a big deal because 12-hour shifts are very, very common in either manufacturing or logistics. But the problem is that only 14% of the people prefer those. And so you're really, really limiting your applicant pool or your candidate pool when you only offer 12-hour shifts. So going back to which shift, first, second, or third, once again, we say we get it. You guys want, many of you want first shift jobs. Is there a shift differential, financial shift differential, that would get you to take a different shift other than first and stay on that shift? Once again, we don't want you to take a third shift job and then leave. We want you to stay on that shift. So how much money would it be in a shift differential that would get you to take a different shift and stop looking? And you can see here in this graphic, it's gone up year after year. And it now is $1.33 on average. Now, our experience tells us that a shift differential of $1 or more will move the needle. Anything less than $1 really doesn't get you more people and more candidates to choose from. And so if you have a shift differential in your operations and it's less than $1, it's probably not having the impact that you're hoping it would be. One of the other questions we asked this group is, which do you prefer in regards to PTO? Would you rather have an extra $1 an hour, or would you rather have 5 days paid leave? And this looks like it could be contradictory to some of the other questions that we've asked, because it looks like, wow, they'd rather have PTO than more money. And they just said that pay rate is the single most important thing. I'll point something out. The very first question asks, when you're looking for a job, what's important to you? This question assumes that you already have the job. So if you already have a fair paying job, would you rather have an extra $1 or would you rather have 5 days paid off? Look at that, 79%, almost 80% of the people, and this has been consistent for the last 13 years, would rather have the extra PTO than the extra $1. Now on the right-hand side, I've done a little bit of the math for you. If you had to pay somebody an extra $1 an hour, and there is, of course, there is a payroll burden associated with paying that extra $1, and in this, I think I factored in 30%. It would cost a company $2,700 a year to pay somebody an extra $1 an hour. On the other hand, that same company could give a worker 5 days paid leave and it would only cost them $780. Literally, you could give somebody 3 weeks additional time off of PTO for less money than it would to increase their wages by $1. Now, I know that that makes it a little bit more difficult to manage the workforce if so many of them are taking off, but we have a client in Maryland who gives an excessive amount of excessive amount of PTO to their hourly workforce. Their pay rates are marginal, but they become known as the place to go to work if you want to have a good PTO policy. And they have waiting lists on people who want to go to work there, even though the pay rate is not especially high. It's their lenient PTO policy that they're using as the attractor. And you can see from a financial standpoint, it's kind of like a no-brainer. Moving on, we asked which best fits the reason why you left your last job. And you can see the number one answer there is 20% of the people found a job that paid more money. Once again, these are hourly workers. And when you're making 12 bucks an hour and you get a chance to make 14, that is game changing. That's life changing for you. And so there is a misconception that these hourly workers will go right down the street for 25 cents more an hour. And we know without a doubt that simply is not the case. Unless they were going to leave anyway, if they were going to leave anyway, if they didn't like their schedule, or they didn't like the work, or they didn't like their boss, or whatever, they didn't like the commute, if they're going to leave anyway, then yes, 25 cents an hour would be enough to move them. On the other hand, you can see here that of the people who left, only 3% of the people who left for less than $1 an hour. And you can see that 52% of the people made an additional $2 an hour more. That is a huge increase in a pay rate for people. Of course.
And Brian, let me
go ahead, Enrique.
Benefits was number 3 in their preference list. So it seems like when you go to this question of why are you leaving, pay is what's in their mind. Yeah, benefits may be the number 3 thing I value, but when it comes to changing jobs, it's pay.
Yeah, that's it. I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah. Now, once again, it's this is a significant financial advantage for these workers. They're not leaving for 50 cents an hour. They're saying, holy cow, I can go from $13 an hour to $15 an hour. You know, that's, once again, it goes back to that basic needs, those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These workers are looking for food and shelter, and they're looking to pay their bills. And so the practicalness of having an extra $2 an hour to help pay the rent outweighs most anything else, including benefits. Interestingly enough, you know that we're in the staffing industry, and so we have thousands of workers around the country who do not want to convert onto our client's payroll. And the reason that they don't want to convert onto our client's payroll is because the client pays every other week. And many of these people have a hard time managing their money. They need a paycheck every single week. And so it's interesting. They look at money a little differently than the way you and I might look at our earnings. We often look at compensation and money as something to be managed. And that's not how it's viewed in much of this population. Yep. Going on, of course, we asked why you left. Okay, then we asked a follow-up question, which is, okay, now why did you stay? And so you can see a good company culture was the #1 reason why people stayed with the company that they stayed with the longest. They had a good company culture. And when we dove into that a little deeper, there were 2 words that kept coming up over and over and over again. And those 2 words are, I felt respected, and my boss let me know I was valued. They valued me both as a worker and as a human being. And the cool thing about this, guys, is that, you know, respect and value and many of you are in leadership roles, that costs you nothing. And it's the right thing to do. And so we have an obligation as employers to create a good company culture. It's not only the right thing to do, but it has the advantage of being good business policy from a financial perspective as well. So the important thing to keep in mind is that a good competitive pay rate gets a worker in the door, and a good company culture keeps them in the door. And then finally, we ask workers, are you currently looking for another job? Now, this is a really scary slide. And you can see that, you know, there is 76% of the population is either actively or passively looking for another job. So I'm going to point out something. You know, we have a higher percentage of kind of temporary workers working for us. And so I think our numbers are skewed a little bit, but they're directionally accurate. And so even if we have a 20% inflated number here, the takeaway here is that your hourly workforce is at risk. And so as an employer, you have to do everything you can to keep that workforce engaged and to let them know that you care about them. And so this is both a good number and a bad number. If you're looking to hire, the good thing is that there are a lot of people that would consider taking your job if you have a good reputation and a good fair pay and a good schedule. You can dislodge a worker who's currently working.
Yeah, so this goes to, from a retention standpoint, sometimes that, and I've been operational leader and I've got to be transparent. Sometimes the whole aspect of retention and telling people why we want them to be part of our organization, we forget to be almost like you have to continually be selling that to your people and be continually telling your people why you want them to be there. It's so easy to, with the busyness of challenges and next week, to forget that you got to show that appreciation. So that, as you mentioned, the respect and the value, but continually to work with people on that.
Enrique, you are spot on. And I would argue that the younger generation has a slightly different mindset. They want to work for a company that has good core values and that maybe contributes to the and is active in the community and has a good purpose. You know, the older generation like me and others, you know, we went to work for a company and we didn't think about their social obligations that the company might have. We just went to work to get a paycheck. Yeah. And so this younger generation, is really important that we focus a lot of time and attention on what's important to them as well. I'm going to shift to the very specific associate mindset survey that we did particular to the COVID-19. So we just asked a few questions. You know, has the pandemic affected your desire or your ability to go to work? You know, and you can see that 38% of the people said, yeah, I'm either my desire, you know, I'm scared to go to work because I'm afraid I'm going to catch the virus, or I simply can't go to work because I don't have somebody to watch my kids because the childcare is closed, right? Or I don't have somebody, you know, somebody in my household that I'm responsible for has symptoms. And so you can see a lot of people have been affected by the pandemic. The other thing we said was, look, when you're thinking about returning to work, either returning to your old job or getting a brand new job, what's the single most important thing to you? Now, I just spent a lot of time telling you about how important pay rate is, but that takes second place in this very, very specific pandemic mindset survey. And it's the health and safety of themselves and their families that trumps everything else. And so it's really important for companies to broadcast the fact that they are doing everything possible to keep their workers safe and healthy. And so I anticipate that the pay rate will be, will shoot right back up. It will ricochet back up to number one in the next coming months. So then we said, in general, do you think employers understand the difficulties that their average worker is caused, that the difficulties on their average worker that's caused by the pandemic? You can see that there's a bit of a disconnect. I'm sure most management teams and executive teams think, oh, you know, we truly understand what our workers are going through. Well, there were 11,000 people in the survey who would differ. When we asked people how concerned they are about COVID-19, and you can tell, I'll ask you to pay particular attention to the dates down there at the bottom, is that, you know, it crested at 51% of the people that ranked it a 10 on a 10-point scale. And you can see that, you know, with the resurgence of cases and cities opening up and closing back down and all of that stuff and schools starting again, it's a big concern. A 10 out of 10 for 43% of the participants in the survey. Next, I want to, unless there's some specific questions, I'm going to move on to just a brief review of update on unemployment benefits. Okay?
Yep.
So let's look at that. So as a reminder, some of you have had experience with unemployment benefits. In the past, there were 3 basic criteria that everyone had to meet in order to qualify for any unemployment benefits. And those 3 criteria was they had to lose their unemployment through no fault of their own. So if they had too many absences and they were terminated for excessive absenteeism, or they just walked off a job or whatever, they would not qualify for unemployment benefits. The second criteria was they had to be willing and able to go to work. And the third criteria is that they had to be actively seeking employment. And so when the CARES Act was passed, the federal government changed those requirements. First off, they eliminated any waiting period that existed if some states had waiting periods. But they also eliminated the requirement for people to be actively seeking employment. As a matter of fact, that's kind of the last thing they wanted. They didn't want people going around applying from one company to the next, to the next, to the next. And so they eliminated the need to be actively seeking employment. And then they also adjusted the definition of able. And so, you know, in the past, you had to be able to go to work. Now, if you are unable to go to work because your kid's child care center was closed, that did not disqualify you. If you were unable to go to work because somebody in your household showed symptoms, that did not disqualify you from receiving unemployment benefits. And so the unemployment benefits have been very, very generous. And it's up until certainly with the additional $600, and we'll get into that in a second. So the way that the national average is $378 per week that somebody would receive in unemployment benefits. Basically, it's about 50%. And I think in Tennessee, it's $270 or something like that is the maximum. But Tennessee is very low compared to some other states where the weekly benefit is $600 or $800 paid by the state. But in general, it's about 50% of somebody's previous wages. On top of that, people were receiving an additional $600 per week from the CARES Act. So if these workers, basically, for sitting at home and not working, they were receiving the equivalent of $24.45 an hour for staying at home and not going to work. Many of our jobs pay $14 and $15 an hour. So we were having a heck of a time trying to convince somebody, look, instead of staying home and receiving 24 bucks an hour, why don't you come work your butt off for 40 hours a week and get 15 bucks an hour? They were just not making that connection. Now, many of you know that the president signed an executive order at the beginning of August, and that provides for an additional $300 or $400 a week. And that actually is funded through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And a lot of times, you know, the states actually have to apply for that money. And there's 48 states who have applied and been approved for that money so far. And so these payments are being paid out, and they're being paid out retroactively to when the CARES Act, you know, that extra $600 stopped at the end of July. So it's been a huge impact on the workforce. And as a matter of fact, this is the reason why so many jobs are open. In our company alone, we have 17,000 open job orders around the country that we're having difficulty filling because workers are receiving so much money staying at home and not working. So it's a pretty big deal for us. There's 3 primary factors that are affecting the labor market right now. Oh, in Tennessee, the maximum, I think I misquoted, I think I might have said 260 to 270 earlier. The maximum unemployment benefits in Tennessee is $275 a week, but now FEMA, or the federal government, is automatically giving these same workers $300 every week. So a worker who qualifies for unemployment benefits gets the equivalent of $14.37 an hour for not working. And so It's unclear right now how long this extra $300 is going to last. You know, I've seen estimates as short as 5 weeks or as long as through the end of the year. Another major factor affecting the labor force is this weird school schedule people are in. You know, here in the county that I live in South Carolina, students go to school rather 2 days a week, Monday and Tuesday, and they learn virtually Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A second portion of the student population learns virtually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and shows up at school Thursday and Friday. Well, that's almost impossible for parents to commit to a Monday through Friday schedule. And so it's really, really challenging for people. And that's reducing the labor force. And then you actually have people, there are a lot of people out there that still, and you could tell from our previous survey, they're concerned about the virus, catching the virus. And that's keeping people at home as well. So we end up with some recommendations. And the very first thing that companies have to do is they have to make sure that their pay rates are competitive for the market that they're in. You know, if companies don't have a competitive pay rate, they never get an opportunity to attract the best workers, because the workers will hold out for a good competitive pay rate. We know,
Brian,
yeah, go ahead, Enrique.
you know, so given that, what are you advising your clients today when the unemployment payment dynamics? Because companies are having to make the decision, okay, so do I increase my pay rates to offset the unemployment benefits that will end up going away? That's a tough spot. So, I mean, what are you recommending your clients on how to be competitive but not create an ongoing problem?
Yeah, boy, you've asked such a good question. So here's what we're recommending companies to do. Make sure that their base pay rate is competitive, and then very much like peak season premiums for the e-commerce is to have a peak season premium. We often call it now a surge premium. So the base pay could be $13 an hour, but then there's a surge pay, if you will, of $2 or $3 an hour. And then once this pandemic shakes out and the unemployment benefits get back to where they are back to more normal state, you can remove that that surge pay, and go back to a base rate. But many of the 3PL companies have to get permission to pass that additional costs on to their client. But the only way that we're able to fill many of our job orders is to offer surge premium pay. We're seeing in many of the retailers already, Walmart and Target and Amazon, and many of those companies are paying surge pay on top of a base pay. But they do it in two different categories. They create their base wages and then a very conditional surge pay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then that way they can adjust that. Many of you may remember that there was a diesel surcharge, you know, when diesel prices skyrocketed. And then that eventually went away when diesel prices declined.
You know, Brian, to your comment and recommendation, we have one of our participants mentioned knowing of a company that is offering a $4 incentive pay on top of base pay.
We do work with a medical device manufacturer up in Minnesota, and they are offering a $3,500 sign-on bonus. Last year, they offered nothing, right? Didn't need to. But to combat what I might say, the high rate that people are receiving every week by not going to work, it's hard to entice people to go to work. And so things like a surge premium pay or sign-on bonuses, things like that, will help get people off the couch. Yeah, we've never been in a situation like this, certainly not in my lifetime, where we have so many things working against us. We have high unemployment, but we have the thought of the virus itself. We have generous, very generous unemployment benefits, you know, and we have this weird school schedule. And so it's the perfect storm going against us as employers. The next recommendation, this is pretty basic, guys. You have to make sure that the health and safety measures that you're taking, that you're trumpeting those, that you're bragging about the fact that you guys are, as employers, are investing a lot of money, and that the health and safety of the workforce is the single most important thing to employers. We strongly encourage companies to add part-time shifts and flexible shifts, because that will allow students and stay-at-home parents and second jobbers to accept those short-term. So instead of you know, a 12-hour shift, we know that so few of the people prefer that. Maybe you want to break that 12-hour shift into 2 6-hour shifts. The most obvious one is, you know, you have to treat your associates, hourly associates, with respect, and you have to make darn sure that they know that you value their hard work. I strongly encourage companies to adjust their attendance policy. Sometimes companies have such a stringent attendance policy that they fire an awful lot of people. And when unemployment rates are low, or in weird labor markets like we're in right now, if you fire somebody for having poor attendance, there's a darn good chance you're going to replace that employee with somebody who just got fired from a company down the street for having poor attendance. And so it's this vicious cycle. And so what you want to do is make sure that your attendance policy is accommodating to these weird school schedules that parents have to deal with, and the fact that, you know, when somebody's in their household comes down with the virus, they have to self-quarantine. And so it's really unusual there. You saw the interest that hourly workers have in PTO. So that's money very, very well spent. We have to adjust I ask companies to look at their hiring requirements. You know, if the job is to unload a truck, why do you care if they have a high school diploma? There's all kinds of second chance programs out there that I encourage companies to take a look at. To put this in perspective, and second chance programs are people who have spent time in prison. And so the US has 4.4% of the world's population. The US has 22% of the prison population in the world. There's no way you can convince me that the people living in the United States are 5 times worse than any other country. And so I think it's important for us as employers to make sure that these people, once they get out of prison, they have a good, meaningful job so that they don't have to go back to a life of crime. And so that actually wraps it up for me. And I think we have a couple of minutes. Yep,
Yeah, we have 2 or 3 minutes. Please type in your questions. I'm sure the questions I asked were not all the questions you guys had in mind. So please. So Brian, we have a couple of questions. One is, do you think that there will be another CARES Act to support those most financially affected? If not, what will be the impact to the blue collar workers?
Yeah, you know, Congress is pretty good at giving away somebody else's money, right? There's a couple of, it's so easy for that. Well, there's a couple of things going on. I think that there will be additional benefits being given to this workforce. There's studies been done. I've seen some economic modeling that for every dollar that they spend in unemployment benefits, it stays in the community, and it has a value of over $2, simply because those are the people that are buying groceries locally, and they're spending their money locally on rent and gas and that kind of stuff. And so if you're going to spend money as a government, unemployment benefits is a pretty good way to do it. Now, I think they've been too excessive. As a matter of fact, it's created a disincentive to go to work. If you make more money staying at home, you could argue that these workers have a financial obligation to their family to stay home, you know, as long as they qualify for it legally. Yeah, so I'm anticipating that there will be continuous benefits down the road. Now, I'm warning companies also that somebody's got to pay for this, you know, and so your payroll burden, I'm anticipating, will go up significantly in 2021 and beyond. Yeah.
And you mean that from an employment catch-up and an employment perspective, right?
Yeah, from an
the unemployment rates really are a relatively small percentage. Your SUTA and FUTA are relatively small percentages of payroll, and so you anticipate that those will be going up.
Yeah, they're a relatively small percentage now, but I think that they'll take on a much higher percentage of the burden. Yeah.
Okay, and I think there was also a question along with that around, you know, when the FEMA money runs out, if Congress doesn't do anything, game's over, right?
Well, I was 100% wrong. I thought when that extra $600 ran out, I thought that our offices around the country would be flooded with applicants. That simply hasn't been the case. As a matter of fact, we worked in lockstep. The number of applications, and by the way, our whole company employs about 85,000 people around the country. And so up until this pandemic, our application flow worked in lockstep with the unemployment rate. Higher the unemployment rate, the higher the number of applicants. The lower the unemployment rate, the lower number of applicants each week. You saw the number of unemployed people in that very first slide, with 6.9 million people in just 1 week, and our applicant flow didn't change. And that's because of the generous benefits. People were literally making more money, and the stimulus check.
Hey, we're 1 minute over, but let me include this question, Brian, and then we'll close. Everybody, thank you for your participation and patience. So do you have any insights into companies who have added COVID surge pay, when they plan to remove it, under what circumstances, and what do you think that impact would then have on the current workforce?
Yeah.
Have you a little crystal ball there?
Yeah. So the companies that have implemented it, they're keeping it on until at least until this extra $300 from the FEMA payment goes away, at least that long, and maybe longer. The problem is the hourly workforce gets it in their mind that they're worth $17 an hour because that's what they're being paid. And by God, I'm not going to work for 14, even though that's what they made in January and February of this year. The University of Chicago did a study, and 2/3 of the people who received unemployment benefits made more money on unemployment benefits than they did when they were working. 2/3 of the people. And 20% of those people made double what they made hourly. And so of course they weren't going to work because they were taking home more money. Yeah. And so, yeah.
So we'll probably look at see what that does to the overall pay going forward. But I think as employers, we're going to have to work really hard on those other factors that attract our people: respect, appreciation, making people feel valued. And really from that standpoint, what's a value proposition as employers to get our people to stay? We're going to have to work double hard on that.
Exactly right. Flexible schedule's important, PTO's important. So that's money really, really well spent. So I would encourage companies to look at that closely.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thank you. Thank you so much. Multiple comments appreciating the insights and the information. They've asked for the slides, which we know you've been gracious to make them available. So thank you very much. Appreciate everybody's patience. I know we're 3 minutes over. Have a great Friday afternoon, great weekend, and we'll see you in our next monthly webinar. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye, everybody.